You ever have a day where you swear you've just stumbled into a movie? One of those wild, slow-burn thrillers where the heroes are never who you expect and the villains were pastel windbreakers? That's exactly how it started for me. Standing behind Grandpa's cabin screen door as three police cruisers slid their way down our family's gravel drive. No sirens, just those silent red and blue lights tearing through the pines, bouncing off tree trunks and shaking the shadows. And out in front of them, strutting like she owned the county, was Karen, the new HOA president, clutching her clipboard as if it held the keys to the universe. Designer boots spotless, not a single blonde hair out of place, and a voice that could cut glass even before she started yelling. He's squatting on the property. That cabin's supposed to be vacant. Only it wasn't vacant. Never had been. My great-great-grandfather built that place in 1924, long before Karen, long before the HOA. But now they were acting like he was some kind of outlaw, like he didn't belong here, even though our family name was carved into the stone out front. Grandpa wasn't rattled, though. When the officers knocked, he looked over at me with that steady, oak-solid look he gets, and just says, "Stay calm, Ellie. I've got this." He swung open the door, flannel shirt, white beard, eyes hard as hammered steel, and held out a yellowed deed. Paper so fragile it looked like a stiff breeze would tear it apart. "This was notarized decades ago," Grandpa said, voice low and sure. "This land was mine before she could even spell HOA. Karen stormed up like some cartoon villain, screeching about code violations and the integrity of the neighborhood, but the officers weren't buying it. One read the deed, another scrolled county records on his tablet, and pretty soon they turned to Karen and said, "Ma'am, this property isn't part of your HOA. You're trespassing." You'd think she'd be embarrassed, right? Nah. Karen's face twisted into this sour little knot, and she jabbed her finger at Grandpa, spitting. "That man's hiding something, and I'm going to prove it." Now, here's the thing. I got a chill right then, because deep down, I knew she might not be entirely wrong. After the squad cars left and Karen stomped away, Grandpa just stood there a long time, looking at the floor, hands on the old doorframe, as if he was walking through old memories. I finally asked, "Are you hiding something?" He grinned, all sly like when he tells his old army stories. "Not from the law," he says, "but there are things in this cabin most people wouldn't understand." And he waved for me to follow him down the hallway, past the guest room, to the pantry. He handed me a flashlight and reached behind jars and hunting gear. 3 sharp knocks, a faint click, and the whole shelving unit swung out like something from a detective novel. Behind it, hidden stone steps led down into the earth, cold and dust-choked. "Built this after the war," Grandpa muttered. "Wasn't just for storing food. Times were different." At the bottom, an old room lit by a single bulb, maps, radios, books, folders with strange insignias, stuff you'd expect to see in a Cold War movie. "This is what she's after," Grandpa said. "Not because she knows what it is, but because people like her can't stand not being in control." We sat down there for a while, the air thick with secrets, and I realized this was bigger than Karen, bigger than the HOA. It was about history, legacy, about my family's whole story stitched together in silence. But just as that settled in, a camera shutter clicked upstairs, sharp, mechanical. I ran out onto the porch and caught a glimpse of Karen's blonde ponytail vanishing behind a pine. "She won't stop," Grandpa said quietly. "She'll find another way. Paperwork, ordinances, lies. That's how people like her fight." He was right. The next morning, the pantry door was cracked open. A hair, but enough. The back window was jimmied loose, dust brushed aside, and the air tasted cold and violated. Karen had broken in. We couldn't call the police. She'd spin it, say she was just checking on safety, make herself the victim. Grandpa just nodded, face set like stone, and said, "Time to use the old tricks." That afternoon, Grandpa went full Cold War, fishing wire, flour dusted for footprints, a tin can alarm tied to an ancient radio. That night, at 2 a.m., the can rattled. I jolted awake, heart pounding. Grandpa pressed a flashlight into my hand, told me to call the sheriff if things went sideways, and crept down the hall. Next thing I knew, Karen was halfway down the secret stairs, caught like a deer in headlights, hair wild, eyes furious. "What is this?" she hissed. My family's history, Grandpa shot back, lifting the flashlight to reveal a camera over the doorway. And now I've got you on tape, breaking in. She didn't beg, didn't even flinch, just flashed that icy HOA smile. I'll have this condemned, she said. Safety violations, structural hazards. You'll be out by next week. Then she vanished into the night. Grandpa stood there, breathing heavy, eyes burning. She saw something, he said. Something she shouldn't have. We tore apart the basement. Nothing seemed missing, but an envelope with a wax seal lay open on the floor. Inside was a map. Our land, sketched in careful ink, a big X behind the old shed near the creek. I always wondered if it was real, Grandpa whispered. If the country ever went under, these were hidden caches, supplies, documents, stuff that couldn't fall into the wrong hands. This one was ours. If Karen thought there was gold, secrets, whatever, she'd use it to ruin us. We didn't wait. That afternoon, we trudged to the shed, pine needles soft underfoot. Grandpa found the stake at the corner, tapped twice, started to dig. Under the dirt, a rusted steel hatch, and inside, a heavy box, locked, waterproof. Grandpa fished out a small key he'd worn since before I was born. Inside, microfilm, classified folders, old photos, IDs with names from agencies that didn't exist anymore. This is why we kept quiet all those years, he said. This box was never meant to leave. This land. I stared at him. So what now? He just looked out at the trees, dialed a number he hadn't called in 40 years, whispered a name and a code, then hung up. Next morning, a black SUV rolled up. 2 agents in dark suits got out, badges flashed, words exchanged. Karen showed up waving a stack of HOA violations, but when she saw the agents, she froze. They told her, on record, that if she ever set foot on the property again, she'd face federal charges. Karen turned on her heel and was gone. Grandpa put the map in my hand. You're next in line, Ellie. Keep the door closed unless the world needs it open. And right then, I realized, this wasn't about the HOA or nosy neighbors, or even Karen's crusade for control. It was about legacy, mystery, drawing a line in the sand that says, some things you protect, no matter what. So if you stuck with me this far, you know the kind of story this is. If you want more tales where justice hits harder than any clipboard-wielding HOA president, drop a comment, share your wildest family standoffs, and tell me, what would you do if someone tried to erase your history? Because out here, some lines you just don't cross. Thing is, after the agents drove off, the silence felt almost unreal, like the woods themselves were holding their breath for what might come next. Grandpa just leaned on the porch rail, staring out at the trees, his hands shaking a little, not that he'd admit it. For the first time, it felt like the story might finally be over, like maybe we could go back to just being a family on our own land, without the whole neighborhood watching every move. But you know how life works. Nothing's ever that simple, and no good story wraps up with everybody just riding off into the sunset. The next week, word spread through Pine Ridge that Karen was taking a leave of absence. Rumor had it the HOA board called an emergency meeting, suddenly real nervous about poking around anyone's property lines. Folks started giving Grandpa a little more space at the diner, too. Even the ones who'd never really spoken to him. People who used to shoot him those sideways looks, now tipped their hats or left him. To his coffee. Sometimes, all it takes is one good scare for folks to remember how quickly tables can turn. I gotta admit, I liked seeing Karen's empty house every time we drove by. But there's a weird thing about peace and quiet. It makes the secrets echo a little louder. One rainy afternoon, I found Grandpa down in the basement, old radio playing soft static. That lockbox sitting open on the workbench. He was sorting through the folders, lining up those black and white photos in neat rows like he was piecing together some giant jigsaw puzzle. You ever wonder if keeping all this was the right thing? I asked him, honest as I could. He didn't look up, just kept working, his voice rough. It was never about right or wrong, kid. It was about keeping a promise. Sometimes, the world makes you the keeper of things you never asked for. He paused, looking at a photo of his father, my great-granddad, standing by the same cabin. Years before I was even a thought. It hit me. Then, that history isn't just about what you keep locked away. Sometimes, it's about who you trust to open the door when the time comes. And honestly, for all his secrets, Grandpa never hid his love for this place, or for me. I watched him pack up those old ID cards, wrap them in cloth, and tuck them back in the box with the map. Most of this will go back underground, he said, where it belongs. But not the letters. You're old enough now, these are yours. That night, thunder rattled the window panes. I sat at the kitchen table, reading those letters from a woman I'd never met, learning stories I'd never heard, about war and hope and a stubbornness that ran in the family like wild blood. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed on the highway. I thought about Karen, wherever she'd gone, and wondered if she ever really understood what she'd been fighting against. Not just a stubborn old man, but the kind of loyalty that turns a cabin into a fortress. A couple days later, the new HOA president, Mr. Lewis, a quiet guy who mostly kept to himself, dropped by with a pie his wife had baked. He apologized for all the trouble, said the board was rethinking some of their rules, and maybe it was time to start acting more like a neighborhood again. Grandpa just smiled, shook his hand, and said, "Only rule I care about is don't trespass." Mr. Lewis laughed, looking relieved, and I swear that was the first honest laugh I'd heard on that porch in years. As summer turned to fall, the woods changed. No more strange cars parked at the edge of our property. No more clipboard patrols. Life settled back into its old rhythms. Fishing in the creek, chopping wood, the two of us. Sitting on the porch swing talking about everything and nothing. But every once in a while, I'd catch Grandpa watching the tree line, that spark of mischief in his eye, like he was waiting for the next adventure, or maybe just ready to finally rest. You know, there's something about stories like this that never really end. Secrets linger in the walls. Old enemies sometimes find their way back. And every generation gets tested in its own way. Maybe one day I'll have to be the one who stands on this porch, holding an old deed, drawing my own line in the sand. So I'll ask you again, what would you do if someone tried to erase your family's legacy? Would you fight, or would you let history slip away quietly? Let me know down in the comments. And hey, if you're lucky enough to have someone like my grandpa in your corner, give them a hug, yeah? Life's too short to let the Karens of the world steal your story.